So in the last lecture, we looked at some of the intro information to help us understand what photosynthesis is and kind of the nature of light and energy and that sort of thing. So we looked at what ATP was. And if you recall, ATP is like a battery pack that your cell uses to do all sorts of things. Okay, whether it's moving substances back and forth across the membrane, whether it's dividing the cell, dividing the DNA, or in some cases, cells move around, single-celled organisms and different cells in our body. All of that stuff requires energy, and that energy comes from ATP. Okay, so we're going to look at how plant cells make ATP. We're also going to look at how plant cells make sugar. Now, again, remember that plants are not making sugar for our benefit. Plants use sugar to build new plant cells. Okay, remember, glucose can be put together into big long chains to make cellulose. And cellulose is what makes cell walls. Cellulose is what makes, the stems of plants and the roots of plants. So plants are making sugar to help themselves. Plants also use sugar that they make in cellular respiration to make more ATP for energy. Now, it just so happens that we are able to eat that sugar and use it for energy. So plants, we can use them. And also plants make oxygen as a byproduct of photosynthesis. Again, we use that oxygen. Plants don't make it for our benefit. They were around way before we were, but it happens to be a byproduct of this reaction. So photosynthesis is where the plant takes in 6 CO2 molecules from the atmosphere, takes in 6 water molecules from its root system. It uses light energy from the sun to combine these two products, or these two reactants, into the product glucose, C6H12O6, plus 6 oxygen molecules, which it releases out into the atmosphere. So that is the entire chemical reaction for photosynthesis. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to take this reaction and we're going to break it into 2 parts. The first part is called the light-dependent reaction, and the second part is called the Calvin-Benson cycle. Now, last lecture, I also went over the structure of a chloroplast. Okay, so if you guys will recall, we have our plant leaf, right? Here's kind of the leaf, and the leaf is green. If we take a look inside this leaf, if we blow a leaf up, we will see that the leaf is composed of cells. Okay, and then inside these plant cells were a bunch of green dots, right? And I showed you a picture of this in the last lecture. If we take one of those green dots and blow it up, this is what we get. So this thing right here, this diagram that I have on the screen, is the chloroplast. Now, if you will remember from last lecture, the chloroplast has a number of different structures. Okay, it has a jelly-like substance inside the chloroplast, and that's called the stroma. Okay, and it's got these discs right here. A stack of these discs is called a granum. And each individual disc is called a thylakoid. Okay, so we have our thylakoid, they're stacked up in granum, and then the granum are floating in a jelly-like substance called the stroma. So what we're going to look at in this lecture is the light-dependent reactions, and the light-dependent reactions occur in the thylakoid. So we're only going to be looking at this disc-like structure, not the entire chloroplast. And sometimes diagrams are confusing because the thylakoid looks kind of like the chloroplast. But keep in mind, we're only looking at one of these discs today, okay? Now, the light-dependent reactions occur only in the daytime. That's why they're called light-dependent reactions. We have to have sunlight for these reactions to occur. Okay, so they only occur during the day when there is sunlight. Now, if you guys will recall, Sunlight is made up of all sorts of different wavelengths of light, right? There's green, there's violet, there's oranges, there's reds, there's all sorts of different wavelengths. If you shine sunlight through a prism, you can see all the different wavelengths of light. Now, plants are green, meaning they reflect green light. They don't use it at all. What they do use is light that they absorb. Now, can anybody remember from last lecture, what wavelengths of light do plants really like? They like wavelengths in that red spectrum and in the violet spectrum. Okay, so in the green, yellow, green spectrum, they reflect that light and they don't use it. So only absorbed light gets converted. Okay, now sunlight carries energy with it, and that sunlight comes down and it hits the plant. Okay, so here's the sun. It's happy, happy sun. Sunlight is coming out and it's hitting the chloroplast of the plant. And inside the chloroplast of the plant, we have these thylakoids. Now, if we take it and blow up one of these grana here, okay, what we're doing is we're blowing up the grana so it's big. Okay, each one of these discs right here is called the thylakoid. Okay, and on top of the thylakoid are these little specks here, and they are called photosystems. And there are two photosystems found on the membranes of the thylakoid. Okay, they're called photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. All right, so just again, so we understand what's going on, here is a stack of thylakoids called a granum. If we take that and kind of blow it up into bigger, okay, here's this granum, this stack, and what we're concentrating on is one thylakoid. Now, on top of the thylakoid are these photosystems, and the job of the photosystem is to absorb light energy. So light hits these photosystems and it gets absorbed. Okay, now not green light. Green light gets reflected. So violet light and red light get absorbed by these photosystems. Now remember, if you're wearing a black hoodie or a black shirt on a hot day, that black color is going to absorb the light and turn it into heat. If you're wearing a light white t-shirt, all that light gets reflected away and you stay cool. So absorbed light can be converted. Reflected light is useless. Okay? So what these photosystems do is they absorb blue and red light. Now, what is a photosystem? So if we zoom down into the photosystem, a photosystem is embedded in the thylakoid membrane. So remember, ladies and gentlemen, that these things right here are phospholipids. And the phospholipids arrange themselves into a phospholipid bilayer, and they form a membrane. So we have the outside of the membrane. This is outside of the thylakoid, and this is inside of the thylakoid. And embedded inside the thylakoid is this structure right here, which is the photosystem. Okay, so sunlight, this photon, that's sunlight, it comes down and it strikes chlorophyll molecules that make up the photosystem. So the photosystem is made up of little dots of chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is a green pigment that absorbs light and reflects green light. So the red, the violet, that gets absorbed by this chlorophyll, and the chlorophyll starts to get excited and it passes that energy on to the middle of the photosystem, okay, which is called the reaction center. Okay, so just so you guys understand here again, right? Here's that stack of granum. Here's the hollow thylakoid. What we're talking about is the membrane of the thylakoid. Okay, so embedded in that membrane of the thylakoid are these photosystems. Light shines down on these photosystems and that light gets absorbed. Now, in the middle of the photosystem is the reaction center, and in that reaction center is a low energy electron. Now, light that strikes the photosystem, think of the photosystem like a big radar dish, like a big satellite dish. It's collecting energy, it's collecting waves. And those waves get funneled down into a microphone, and then that microphone converts those waves into a TV signal or whatever. Okay, if it's a dish. That's kind of what's happening here. Think of these photosystems like big dishes. And the sunlight is collected in these things, and in the middle of it is this electron. Okay, and the electron has no energy. So what the sunlight does is it shines down on the photosystem collects the sunlight and turns it into energy, which gets invested into the electron. So now that low energy electron becomes very excited and it can't be held in there anymore. So it fires out, it pops out. All right, so here's a different artist's rendition of what a photosystem looks like. So this would be embedded inside the thylakoid membrane. Sunlight is shining down, so this photon, that's just sunlight. Okay, a little packet of sunlight is called a photon, and it carries energy with it. Okay, that energy is absorbed by this stuff right here. Okay, this stuff right here is chlorophyll. So chlorophyll absorbs the energy from the photon of light, and it passes all that energy to this middle part right here, which is called the reaction center. And inside that reaction center is an electron. Okay? Now that electron is just sitting in that reaction center. And as the energy gets kind of funneled in there, this electron gets energized. And when it gets really energized, it pops out. And it's collected by a molecule known as the primary electron acceptor molecule. And that's located outside the photosystem. Yes. No. Right. So the electron is in the middle. It's in the reaction center. Okay. So again, picture a satellite dish, and in the middle you have that receiver thing, right? So that's where the electron sits. And the satellite dish would be all the chlorophyll molecules, and it's collecting energy. And it funnels it down to the middle, and that electron's sitting in there. Okay. And then that electron gains a ton of energy, and it gets so energized, it just launches out. Okay, now outside of the photosystem, there's an enzyme, and it's called the primary electron acceptor, and it grabs that high energy electron. So there is a finite amount of electrons in the reaction center. For our purposes, there's one. Okay, again, I use the analogy of a quarterback throwing a football. Okay, the quarterback launches the football. Think of the football like the electron. Okay, that football gets launched. Now, all of a sudden, the quarterback doesn't have another ball to throw. So where are they going to get another ball from? Well, that's where water comes in. Okay, now plants need a steady supply of water because once that electron gets launched out of the photosystem, out of the reaction center, photosynthesis would halt unless we had another electron to replace it. So plants have a special way of replacing those electrons, and what a plant can do is it has special enzymes that can take a water molecule and cut the water molecule apart, okay, into 3 parts. Now, we talked about hydrolysis in the last chapter. And if you guys remember, hydro stands for water, and lysis stands for to break apart or to cut. So hydrolysis was to cut apart using water. The plant does something called photolysis. So what the plant does is it cuts something apart using, photon is light. Okay, photo is light and lysis is cut. So what the plant does is it uses light to cut apart water. So it takes 2 molecules of water. Now, I did this to balance the equation, okay? But what it does is it takes 2 molecules of water. Out of this 2 molecules of water, it gets 4 hydrogen ions. Now, sometimes we call these just simply protons because there's no electron. And there is a neutron, but it really doesn't come into play. So a lot of times when you see this H plus, you'll see it referred to as a proton. Now, why did I put this 2 here to begin with? Well, because oxygen gas gets created. Okay, so in order to get an oxygen gas molecule, I have to have 2 O's, which means I need 2 waters to do that. Okay, so this oxygen gas goes away as waste. So if you'll remember the original formula for photosynthesis, we had that O2, right? That's gone, that's waste. Where does a plant make oxygen from? Breaking apart water. Now, the thing we're really interested in at this point, I'm going to tell you about the protons here in a second, but at this point, what we're really interested in is the fact that the plant also gets out electrons. Okay, so every time the plant breaks apart water molecules, electrons are harvested out of that water. They are low energy electrons. Can somebody tell me where do those electrons now go? Exactly, to the reaction center. Excellent. So again, think of it like you got that quarterback, he's out on the field, he's practicing, he's launching bombs, right? He's got a guy next to him just feeding them footballs so he can continue to throw. That's basically what water is. Water is an electron donor. Okay? And these electrons, what I want you guys to understand is these electrons are low energy. They're useless at this point. Okay, they're useless until the plant invests energy in them. And how does the plant invest energy into these electrons? By absorbing sunlight and funneling that sunlight to the reaction center. So every time an electron gets fired out of the reaction center, a new electron replaces it from water. It's just constant. One fires out, one comes in. One fires out, one comes in. Okay? Now, where do those electrons go? They go up to the primary electron acceptor molecule, which is outside of the reaction center. Where does the oxygen gas go? Out into the atmosphere. It's waste. Where do the protons go? We're going to talk about that in a second. Okay, so the plant gives off the resulting oxygen gas to the atmosphere as waste. The electrons from the broken water molecule are passed to the photosystem to replace the electrons that are lost. The hydrogen ions, or what we call protons, get pumped into the inner thylakoid space. Okay? Now why? All right, so yesterday, we talked all about how a chloroplast is arranged. We have these thylakoids that are all stacked up in a granum. Okay, now remember guys, a thylakoid is like a balloon. Okay, now air, if I leave a deflated balloon on my desk, air is not just going to go into that balloon and inflate it, right? That's not the way pressure works. That's not the way diffusion works. Right? With diffusion, everything wants to spread out equally. So how do I get air inside of a balloon? I have to pump it in there. I can use an actual pump. I have to put energy into the pump in order to move air against its concentration gradient into a balloon, right? Or I can use my lungs, and that requires energy from my muscles to blow that balloon up. Now, the inner thylakoid space is like a balloon, but instead of being filled with air, it's filled with protons. All right. Now, where did those protons come from that we're blowing up the thylakoid with? Water. So when water gets split apart, it gets split apart into 3 things: oxygen, waste; electrons into the photosystem; protons, they get pumped into the inner thylakoid space. Now, the key word there, ladies and gentlemen, is pumped. Whenever you pump something from one place to another, it's going against a gradient of some sort, against a pressure gradient, against a concentration gradient. Okay, it's being moved against its will. and that requires energy. Where does the energy come from to move the protons from the stroma to the inner thylakoid space? From the electron. You got it. Okay, now remember, when that electron got fired out of the reaction center, it was grabbed by another molecule called the primary electron acceptor molecule. Think of it as the receiver. Okay, quarterback threw the ball out, receiver grabbed it. Now, what that receiver is going to do is it's going to pass that electron from molecule to molecule to molecule to molecule in a chain. And we call this the electron transport chain. Hey, look at that. A word, a term that actually makes sense in biology. So the very first molecule in the electron transport chain is the primary electron acceptor molecule. And then there's a bunch of other molecules that you guys don't need to know the name of. They have big long names, and you don't need to know the name. Okay. Anyway, there's a bunch of them, and they get passed on. Every time the electron gets passed from one molecule to the next, a little bit of energy is released. And where does that energy go? It goes into pumping protons. So again here, guys, look, my water got broken apart into electrons. Those electrons ended up in the photosystem. This should say photosystem 2, by the way. I don't know why there's one there. Okay, my protons, they end up in the stroma here, but we don't want them there. We want them in the thylakoid. So they get pumped into the thylakoid. As this electron bounces from one molecule to the next, it releases energy, and that energy is used to pump protons from outside to inside. By the time the electron gets to the end of the chain, it has no more energy anymore. All the energy has been squeezed out of it to pump protons. So are we done with the electron yet? No, it goes to the next photosystem, which is called photosystem 1. So this is very confusing. Photosystem 2 is the first photosystem. Photosystem 1 is the second photosystem. It's backwards. So the electron gets fired out of the reaction center, goes from photosystem 2 onto the electron transport chain where it gets passed from one molecule to the next. It loses all that energy. But what does it do with that energy? We pump protons into the inner thylakoid space, like blowing up a balloon. At the end of the electron transport chain, the electron has no energy anymore, but then it's passed to the second photosystem, which is called photosystem 1. Yep. Now, why does the plant cell pump protons into the inner thylakoid space? Because what it wants to do is build up pressure. Again, I'm going to use my analogy of blowing up a balloon. If I use energy and put air into a balloon, that air is under pressure and it wants to escape. You guys know what a pinwheel is? You know that lawn ornament, that little spinny lawn ornament, right? Imagine if I had a pinwheel and it was hooked up to a little mini generator or something, okay? If I had a balloon that was full of air and I let the balloon go and I pointed the air at the pinwheel, would the air escaping the balloon turn the pinwheel? Could I generate a little bit of electricity? Yes, okay? That's what a plant is doing with protons. It fills the balloon, the thylakoid, with these protons, and then it lets those protons escape out of a little generator. And the generator is called ATP synthase. So as you can see in this diagram here, if you just take a quick look at this diagram, what this thing right here is, that's the thylakoid. Okay, so that purple ring there, that's the thylakoid. Notice here we have a photosystem. This is photosystem 2, and this is photosystem 1. Okay, the electron gets boosted up, and then it goes down the electron transport chain. And as it goes down that electron transport chain, here's the electron, it gets boosted out, right? As it goes down this electron transport chain, it releases energy, and the energy takes these protons and pumps them into this space. Now, once that space gets filled with protons, the protons want to escape, but the thylakoid only lets them escape through this molecule right here. And this molecule right here is called ATP synthase. And the job of ATP synthase is to make ATP. Do you guys remember what we called the molecule that didn't have any energy, the battery that was not charged up? ADP, good. So ADP plus a P goes in, and ATP comes out. All right. So what type of molecule, do you guys remember, ends in the ending ASE? An enzyme. So ATP synthase is an enzyme. The substrate is ADP plus a P. Okay, so the enzyme is ATP synthase. The substrate is ADP plus a P. What ATP synthase is doing is joining that P with the ADP to make ATP. Okay, we're not done with the electron yet. Even though the electron now has no energy after using it all to pump protons, we're not done with it yet. It enters into the second photosystem, which is called photosystem 1. Now remember, what are photosystems? What do? They absorb sunlight. They have a reaction center. So this electron ends up in the second reaction center of photosystem 1. It gets boosted up again. Now it's got a bunch of energy again because it gets boosted up a second time, but it doesn't go through another set of electron transport chains. That boosted up electron, which has tons of energy, is now put into a molecule called NADP. NADP stands for nicotinamide adenosine diphosphate. No, you don't need to know that name. Okay, so NADP has low energy. But what NADP does is it picks up this electron that's now been boosted up a second time. This electron has lots of energy, and it also picks up one of these protons that fired out of the ATP synthase, and it attaches it to itself. Well, an enzyme does that. And what happens is we get this molecule right here, which is called NADPH. And the name of NADPH is reduced nicotinamide adenosine diphosphate. Now, remember, what does reduced mean in chemistry? Right, it means to gain. And what does it gain? It gains electrons and it gains energy. So reduced NADPH has a ton of energy because it's carrying that high energy electron that got boosted up a second time in photosystem 1. Now, this is called the light-dependent reaction because none of this happens unless you have sunlight. Sunlight breaks apart water molecules. Sunlight raises the energy level of the electrons. Without sunlight, the plant does not do this. All right, so all day long when the sun is shining, a plant is making ATP and it's making NADPH. And it's going to use those two products in the second set of reactions, which are called the light independent reactions. Okay, and some plants do that at night, some plants do it during the day. It depends on the plant. Okay, so in the second photosystem, which is called photosystem 1, I know, confusing. So pigments in the second photosystem absorb light and transfer that energy to the electron a second time. It's the same electron that got boosted up once already, it gets boosted up again. But instead of going down that electron transport chain like it did the first time, it is picked up by NADP. It reduces the NADP. The NADP picks up a proton that just fired out of the thylakoid, and it forms NADPH. And like I said before, NADPH is reduced. It has lots of energy. So this is a look at the whole thing occurring. So our first photosystem is photosystem 2. Water gets broken apart into oxygen. This oxygen is going to go out as waste. Okay, this proton is going to get pumped into the inner thylakoid space, and the electron ends up in the reaction center. Sunlight shines down on photosystem 2, the first photosystem. That energy gets invested into the electron gets boosted out of the reaction center to the primary electron acceptor molecule, where it gets passed in a big chain. That's called the electron. Number 4 right here, okay, number 4 is called the electron transport chain. And its job is to extract energy from the electron used to pump protons from the outside of the thylakoid to the inside of the thylakoid. Now, once that electron gets at the end of the electron transport chain, it now has no energy anymore. So it gets put into the second photosystem, which is called photosystem 1. It gets boosted up again, but instead of going down that staircase, that chain, it ends up being put into NADP. It grabs hold of that proton from here. The proton goes here, and it forms NADPH. Okay? Here's just another look at this. So first photosystem, photosystem 2, electron gets boosted up, goes down the electron transport chain, we get ATP. That's called chemiosmosis. The electron now has no energy, right? Here's the electron, it's going down in energy. This is why sometimes we see the electron transport chain built like a staircase or a downward escalator or something, because that electron is losing energy. And as it loses energy, it pumps protons, which are used to make ATP. Once the electron gets to the bottom of the staircase, it ends up into the second photosystem, photosystem 1, where it gets boosted up again. But instead of this time going down the staircase, it is put into NADP plus the proton, and we get NADPH. Okay, so this set of reactions right here is known as the light-dependent reaction. So the light reactions convert solar energy to chemical energy in the form of ATP and NADPH. So the plant is literally taking sunlight and making these two molecules, which contain the energy from the sunlight. Now, what are these two molecules going to be used for? They're going to be used in the second set of reactions, which are called the light independent reactions. And we're going to go over those in the next lecture. Okay, so what I need you guys to know is that at the end of the light-dependent reactions, 3 things are formed. ATP is formed from chemiosmosis. And remember, chemiosmosis, this is the pumping of protons. That's chemiosmosis. Okay, and that's used to make ATP. NADPH is made in the second photosystem, at the end of the second photosystem. And then oxygen gas is made when you break apart water. So photolysis, just to remind yourselves, photolysis is the breaking down of water. And oxygen gas is given off to the atmosphere as a waste product. Okay? All right. What I would like you to do now is on page 9 of your note package, there are a number of questions on the light independent reactions, or sorry, the light dependent reactions. What I would like you guys to do now is please work on those questions on page 9, and we will go over them next class.